This is a cafe racer, and that's a term that gets thrown around a lot today. It covers a lot of different custom bikes, but back in the 60s there was only one kind of bike that was a cafe racer, and this is one of them. So today we're going to talk a little bit about it, and hopefully we can take it out as well. So we know this is a cafe racer, but there's nothing on the tank, so what is it?
Well, it's a Royal Enfield Continental GT. The reason why there's nothing on the tank is because it's my partner Judah's bike. She had the aluminium petrol tank custom made for it, because the original, which looked more or less the same, was fiberglass, and it reacted badly with modern petrol and started to leak, so it needed a metal tank.
Right, so has she been through the whole bike and customised it?
No, this is actually a production model from 1965. They actually made them from the factory looking like this, but with the fiberglass tank, which is painted red to match the mudguards and stuff.
Right, because first impressions, looking at that, you would say that that was a custom motorcycle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's quite an interesting thing when you think about it, that throughout the days of the industry, by and large, people were making bikes for guys to ride to work or hitch a sidecar on, or some kind of working role. But when you think of that whole 1950s invention of the teenager thing they talk about, it suddenly became apparent there were young guys with money to spend, wanted a cool looking bike, all dreamed of having a cafe racer bike.
Yep.
And Royal Enfield are really the only company that made something that was bang on the button.
Yes, yeah, because whilst BSA had the Gold Star, that was something older people could afford and could ride because they're licensed. Yeah. This is a 250 aimed at 17-year-olds.
Yeah, the learner market, basically. In those days you could ride a 250 on L plates. So yeah, absolutely it was. And the story goes that the reason it came to be this way, rather than being some old executive deciding what he thought teenagers wanted, as seems to happen these days, they actually went into the factory and asked the young apprentices and said, what would you like to see on a motorbike that you want to buy? And they came up with the whole thing. So we ended up with the Rev Counter. I mean, a Rev Counter on a 250, you didn't even get one on most 650s in those days, British ones anyway. You had the old bacon slicers, the perforated discs on the brakes, which are supposedly to cool the brake down. You've got the sweatback exhaust pipe, same as on a BSA Gold Star, clip-on handlebars, rear sets, the fancy alloy casket for the clocks, huge, great big breather tube coming out of the engine and stuff, so they really did go to town on it.
Yeah, because this is actually a little bit of a wild move for Royal Enfield. They weren't exactly known for making exotic motorcycles, certainly not something that was going to please a 17-year-old.
No, not at all. They were quite a functional company. I mean, I always think they're a little bit of a Cinderella of the industry, really, because they made very good sound bikes, but they weren't necessarily really eye-catching. Some of them looked quite stylish with chrome tanks, but they just had that slightly older man, reliable bike image to them. So this was a complete slap in the face for all of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's talk about the kind of major things that make this a cafe racer. It's all about position and feeling fast.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, really. I'd not really ever thought of it that way, but you're right. The riding position, the long tank and the forward bars means you're inevitably stretched out. It's obviously intended to get you out of the wind. The footrests are rear set because that accommodates that position, so you're not sitting there like this. That, as you say, I guess just does make you feel like you're going really fast, even if you're not, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if you're ever out on your bike and you're sitting up in the wind, it feels totally different to being laid low on the tank. You feel much faster when you're on the tank.
Yeah, closer to the road, for one thing, I suppose. It's spinning past you much closer when you're leaning down there. But yeah, I mean, certainly that, and then allied to the fact this model of bike, the frame, all the 250 Enfields have got a really, really good chassis compared to a lot of what was available at the time. BSA C15, the 250 mattresses and stuff. They were pretty much built on a budget. But Enfield, to some extent, used one frame for quite a variety of models. So this benefited from being a fairly small engine in cycle parts that were designed for something a bit sturdier.
Yeah.
So it's a really nice thing, and I mean it's something that people converted and put other engines in, a bit like the Norton Featherbed frame. It's a frame if you can get something in there. Particularly like with the forks, if you ride the 250 BSAs of the period, they're pretty clunky. But these, incredibly simple. There's not even any oil in them. They're just sort of like grease lubricated.
Right.
I don't think this one's even got fork seals. If they are, they're really just to keep the grease from splattering about and stuff. But very simple design, proper aluminium bottoms, where most British bikes still had steel at that time. Look at the brake, it's quite a big brake. If you saw the other side of it, it's got the air scoop on it, the classical sort of racy trick. So you've got something that stops pretty well, handles pretty well. And the motor, they were a little frail, I have to say.
Right.
They're quite a good engine, but you're aiming at the 17-year-olds and telling them it's a quick bike, so
Yes,
that causes issues. But they're supposed to be good for about 80 odd.
Yeah, so let's talk about the motor for a second. Obviously, it's a 250, but it's got a bit of a bark and it's quite sprightly. What do they actually do inside there to make it that way?
On these, particularly over the standard Crusader, I mean they've got a more high performance cam in them.
Right.
I presume the compression ratio is higher, and I'm not sure they haven't. I think they've got bigger valves as well than the standard Crusader, bigger carburettor. So they did put some effort into tuning it.
Yeah.
Judy actually bought the bike initially because she was very much into the rocker era. We both were, and this to her epitomised the absolute 60s thing. It's got that 60s flash look to it, kind of thing. And she's in the 59 club in London, and she used to zip about London on it, and it's a great little bike for that kind of use. It's very nimble, quite quick off the mark. The only thing that's a bit of a dodgy bit about it generally with these is the gearbox is a little bit haphazard.
Right.
It's quite a close ratio gearbox, which is nice, but it can be difficult to select gears. But originally they actually came with a 5-speed gearbox.
Right.
But rather ominously they supplied you with a 4-speed gearbox cluster with it. So they kind of yeah. But basically they're trying to pack 5 gears into the space for 4, so everything was just a little bit minimised. But
Okay.
they're tricky to set up. I thought I got it right this time, but it still can be a bit funny getting into second, as you'll probably realise when you ride it later.
Yeah, I suspect so. Right, so we've mentioned the term cafe racer a lot, but let's have a little talk about where did that actually originate from? What is the idea?
Yeah, I suppose the thing is, if you think back to the sort of 1960s and stuff, pub culture was very much a thing for older people, really. It wasn't like nowadays when people of all ages would go to pubs. It was more the kind of place your dad would go for a pint and a game of dominoes or something like that. So younger people, particularly mobile people on motorbikes, there was a huge network of transport cafes in those days. Nowadays we don't have that so much, as the motorway serves is very little else really, but in those days any big road would have a cafe on it. You get the truckers pulling in there, but you'd always also have a load of motorbikes there.
Yep.
And the point of Cafe Racer, it was actually, like so often with sort of names applied to youth groups, it was actually a bit of an insult really. You're saying, oh, it's a racer, it goes from cafe to cafe, sort of thing. That's the only racing it ever does. So you'd burn up your mates from one cafe to the next and have a cup of tea and then go on to another one. So that's the origin.
So what we're talking about is some good harmless fun. There's no drink, there's no drugs. It's just you and your mates having a little burn up and racing around town a bit. Yeah,
basically it was a sort of a cheap evening out. Just go and get yourself a cup of tea and a burger or something like that, and just have a fun time riding around the local roads. Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Well, I think it's probably about time that we get this out on the road and give it a little test ride.
Could be. Okay, let's do it.
So, what do I have to say about the Royal Enfield Continental GT? Well, what a brilliant bike. It handled so superbly. It really felt like it was on rails. It was nimble, and as you were riding it, yes, I kept mentioning that it was a 250, but it really didn't feel like it. It just gave me so much pleasure to ride that thing. I really felt fast, even though I wasn't. So obviously Royal Enfield made it for 17-year-olds, but I wasn't expecting it to make me feel like a 17-year-old. It made me want to slice and dice up in between cars. It made me want to rev bomb people. It made me want to lean around the corners, and I can see why they got a bit of a hard time by the youngsters. Now this bike has only just been put back together, so I did run into a couple of issues. You'll notice in the last frame I turned off the bike, there's a little bit of oil leaking from the head. I've been told by Rick that they did also have the nickname of Royal Oil Field, so not entirely surprising. I think if we can, I'd like to take that bike out again and maybe do a comparison video with another bike of some sort, because it really is a cracking little machine. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed today's episode, and it's given you a little bit of insight into what is classed as probably a real cafe racer, something where the cafe racer scene kind of originated from. Let me know in the comments if you enjoy this type of video, a little walk around the bike, a bit of educational stuff, and then a ride as well. I really enjoy filming this stuff. I enjoy my time with Rick and Judy as well. So a massive thank you to them for helping me film this. Obviously it wouldn't be possible without them. And thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it. If you did like it, make sure you give us a thumbs up. And if you want to see more, make sure you subscribe, because I think there's probably a couple more Cafe Racer videos to come. So stay tuned, and I'll see you then.